Hello everyone, this is Ben, and today we're looking at a Task 2 IELTS essay. Some experts believe that it's better for children to begin learning a foreign language at primary school rather than beginning to learn a foreign language at secondary school. Do the advantages of this outweigh the disadvantages? So it's a benefits and drawbacks one. As always at this point, I recommend that you pause the video to read the essay yourself. Pause it on each slide. This is the first one. The second. The third. So the second body paragraph here. And the conclusion, which is the fourth and final paragraph. And I recommend that you do this so that you can think about the scores before I suggest scores. It might be useful to see how closely our predictions align with each other. So I'll score this at the end, but I want you to think about it first. And I want you to think about it by looking at the writing band descriptors, the public version, which is available to everyone. Just ask Google if you don't know where to find it. Just type in IELTS Test 2 writing band descriptors, and you'll be able to find a downloadable version of this. So this is to help you, I guess, as a potential IELTS candidate, understand what you have to do to get particular scores. Because it's not fair if you don't know what to do. So, there has to be a public version so they can tell you what you have to achieve to satisfy the requirements of a particular score, like 6, 7, 8, 9, for each of the 4 things being assessed. Each of the 4 assessment criteria. I shouldn't say things, I'm trying to sound smart and formal, so I won't say things. Anyway, without further ado, let's have a look at the essay. So, introduction, nice and short, and that's okay. 3 sentences could be enough. Some people believe it will benefit children if they start learning a foreign language at primary schools, not secondary schools. Although there are some disadvantages to this, the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. This is because young children excel in learning languages. A few things. We tend to say at primary school, at secondary school, not schools. Logically, I can understand why someone would think children at their different schools, but it's not usually what we say in English. So I'll change that one. Not is not good. It's more like very informal speaking style. I can understand the writer doesn't want to repeat rather than in the question. So I'll say instead of. Or I could say as opposed to or something like that. Again, I shouldn't say something too informal as an alternative to that. Although there are some disadvantages to this, it's very repetitive, isn't it? The advantages outweigh the disadvantages. So let's change that to make it a bit smoother for the reader, more cohesive. So although there are some disadvantages to this, those disadvantages, I'll use the passive, they are outweighed by the many advantages overall. You're going to say why briefly in the introduction. That's a good idea, but I'll just make it a bit smoother by saying ultimately. So to give my keeping, ultimately this is because young children tend to excel in learning languages, particularly relative to the rate at which adults tend to learn new languages. So it's a bit limited, but it's very clear. I'm happy enough with this introduction. In regard to learning a language, age is significantly important. Significantly important sounds a bit odd. I'd say very important. If a person learns a language at an early age, well, I think at is the wrong preposition because it's giving the time when you start. So we say begin at, so start at that time. But just because you start at that time, it doesn't mean you only learn it at that time. It just means you start at that time. So better to say learn. Oh, well, it's a foreign language, isn't it? A second language or additional language, a foreign language from an early age. They have much more chances to speak it. Yeah, chance can be countable or uncountable. Many more chances kind of makes sense, but much more chance, much more opportunity as an uncountable works better. Chances to speak it would make sense, but it's actually the wrong meaning of chance, so we have to delete this. So much more likelihood, probability, that's a different meaning of chance. Much more chance, like a much higher percentage, much more chance of something happening, much more chance of speaking it. Let's say of eventually, like one day speaking it. Like a native speaker. Like sounds a little bit informal here. So maybe as well as a native speaker, but it's not a big deal, so we'll move on. We often see that young children who have immigrated to a foreign country without knowing a word become very fluent in the language within a short time. Yeah, that's fine, yeah. Maybe just as of the national language. The national language is the main one spoken. So they've immigrated to a foreign country without previously knowing the words of the national language, and they become very fluent within a short time. Furthermore, younger children have much more time than secondary school students. Yeah, that's true. Maybe explain why. There's more focus on important exams in secondary school. Students in secondary school are busy with their studies and extracurricular activities. They cannot afford to find time to study. Well, you don't afford to find time. You just can find time or you can't find time. So I have to change that. I don't like having lots of very short sentences like this, so I'll just connect them. It's going to be a very simple connection. They're busy, so they are often unable to find time or to find the time to study. Learning a foreign language only means that they have another subject to study for exams. Yeah, that's a good point. So their study workload is getting bigger and bigger the more subjects they study. On the other hand, younger children can learn a foreign language with fun activities but no exams. Yeah, I guess maybe just tend to explain that teachers tend to make learning more engaging for younger children because they have a shorter attention span, for example, so there are lots of games. The point's fine, I just feel it maybe needs a bit more development. Good point, but just explain it a little bit more, maybe. Despite those advantages, okay, that's quite nice. Learning a language can be stressful for some children. Probably not the native language, because they usually learn that unconsciously, but learning a second language, sure, can be stressful for some children. Every child is different, and their language ability is different too, okay? You could argue that the style is slightly informal, but, with the use of to at the end there, it sounds more like speaking. But it's not massively inappropriate, I think, maybe just slightly. Some children struggle with learning their language sometimes. Again, it's lots of short sentences. Short sentence, short sentence. Maybe I'll just put it together. Semicolon is good. So semicolon is the one that's like winking when it's for a kind of new point but related to the previous one. And for this one, we're talking about language ability, and we're just going to build on it. And some children even struggle with learning their native language sometimes. And that's true. As a teacher, I can tell you there are certain issues like, we say like language delay, for example. When some kids develop kind of literacy skills like reading ability, an ability to use language when speaking at a slower rate than other children. So it is true that there are sometimes issues with learning native language. Uncommon, but not too uncommon, actually. Maybe less uncommon than you would think. To those children, teaching a foreign language might make them feel pressured and insecure. Moreover, it will reduce the class hours of other important subjects such as physical education, art, or the official national language. This is good. I like this. There's nothing I would really change. Nice vocabulary there, for example. It should be discussed thoroughly if teaching a foreign language to young children is worth teaching a foreign language when their time can be used to study something else. That's very hard to understand, isn't it? Big question mark, big confused face. So huge contrast. You've got this excellent, very easily understandable sentence here, then you've got this very confused sentence here. So let's change this. It should be discussed thoroughly, so by parents, teachers, educational experts, the headmasters or principals of schools, government officials like the Secretary of State for Education. It should be discussed thoroughly whether or not teaching a foreign language to young children is, well, you can't say the same thing twice, is worth doing this. So I could say whether or not it is worth. To young children, but it is worth is a bit kind of casual, informal. Teaching a foreign language to young children is worthwhile when their time can be used to study something else, or even just run around and play and be a child. Heavens forbid children should have time to go outside and play. To study something else is a bit vague, isn't it? Be a bit more specific. Let's say so many other subjects, potentially. Everyone's time is limited. Even children's, there are only 24 hours in the day, so sure. Maybe they have to prioritize other things, like these ones. Maybe you could argue why others are more important rather than as important or less important. Again, that's just an issue with developing the points a bit more, which I think this essay needs. To sum up, while there are some drawbacks to teaching a foreign language at primary school, it's evident that the benefits offset them. If this happens in the future, if the education authorities and schools contemplate so, the benefits will offset them in the future, if in the future they do these things. Okay, this is a good essay, I thought. The scores I'm going to give. 7.5. In individual parts, 8, 8, 7, 7. That's what I ended up with. I thought it was good, definitely, but I just thought there needed to be a bit more development at times. That's the main thing that I took from this essay. So explain a bit more, maybe, for example, about why these should be considered more important than learning a second language, if that's your argument, you know. Maybe I would disagree with that, maybe I would agree, but if you're choosing an argument for your essay, it's your job to make a really strong argument. So why should these be considered more important? Convince me if I'm not already convinced, or if I agree with you, convince me more, you know. Strengthen your argument by providing a very persuasive amounts of supporting detail, I suppose. Not even amount, sorry, it's not about the quantity, but just develop it a little bit to finish the thoughts. So these are more important, yep. Prioritize these. But just build on that, add that little bit more. Why should these be considered more important? And that's a recurring issue in this essay. So well-developed response, but it's not perfect. It's not fully developed, and that's why I gave it 8. Coherence and cohesion. Very well organized in terms of the language and putting it together. Can I say that it's in such a way that attracts no attention? No, of course I can't. There's a big loss of cohesion in one part in particular. It was here. The writer was doing very well, but just went to sleep. Wrote the same thing twice for some reason. It's a shame because that was unnecessary, but I can't be too generous for the reader. Yeah, the kind of coherence was really lost there, unfortunately. Lexical resource and grammatical accuracy. I went a bit lower. I gave 7, which I felt a little bit guilty about because there's a lot of good language. Sometimes I was really impressed, as I told you. This was such a great sentence, for example. Knowing expressions like official national language, very good. Slightly confusing because actually official language and national language have different meanings, slightly. But that would be such a high level of knowledge about the language that I'm not going to be too strict about that. Official language is kind of like the ones recognized by the government. National language is the main one used. There is actually a slight difference. You can just look up the meaning if you want to know the differences. But yeah, lots of good language throughout. You can see that, I think. Good understanding of words that go together well, you know, collocation. Immigrated to a foreign country without knowing a word of the language, become very fluent in a relatively short time. Knowing language like this, extracurricular activities, just having a quick look, I can see a lot. Excelling, you know, quite nice. But there are definitely limitations. obviously understanding the meaning of like foreign language, non-native language. We're not talking about their mother tongue, we're talking about second or additional language, and it's got sometimes, but not consistently. There are mistakes with the word choice, but overall it's very, very good. So 7 for that. Some flexibility and precision. I wouldn't say that the vocabulary is fluently and flexibly to convey precise meanings, with only occasional accuracies. The inaccuracies are more than occasional, and there's some flexibility and precision. And for grammar, variety of complex structures, but not a wide range. There's not a lot of really long, fancy sentences that I'm seeing here. And even though the error rate is quite low for grammatical mistakes, it's not very adventurous with the grammar. It's good, but just not in a way that would get the highest scores. And of course, the issue that we talked about here, that's going to affect several things: the coherence score, the word choice score, and the grammar score. And another thing about lexical resource, or the word choice, if you look here for, I missed this one, sorry. To those children, teaching a foreign language might make them feel pressured and insecure. It's not really teaching a foreign language, is it? It's learning a foreign language. But I could say at the school, the teaching of a foreign language. So the teaching to them of a foreign language. Because the children aren't teaching, so, we have to be clear about that. It's saying children teaching this may make them feel pressured and insecure. So there's a few things here. But, a very, very good score nonetheless. I think, we're talking about 7 or 7.5, but I landed on 7.5 after reading it a couple of times, and I wonder how closely your predictions align with mine. So as always, feel free to ask questions or leave a comment at the bottom of the video, and thank you for watching and listening as always.